It's 11:30, good evening, and welcome back to OJ News. At her request, Elizabeth's coronation in 1953 was the first to be broadcast on television. Britain was still recovering from World War II, and the coronation united the millions of people who tuned in to watch the pomp and spectacle. I have in sincerity pledged myself to your service, as so many of you are pledged to mine. Throughout all my life and with all my heart I shall strive to be worthy of your trust, the Queen told the nation. The enthronement was marked by an unprecedented outbreak of coronation frenzy among the 650 million members of the Commonwealth and the world beyond. The fever reached such heights that even loyal royal biographer Hugh Montgomery-Massingberd described it as a climate of almost embarrassingly excessive euphoria. 40 years after the Elizabethan age dawned, the Queen reflected on the role she was thrust into. It's a question of just maturing into what you're doing and accepting that here you are and it's your fate. I think continuity is very important. It is a job for life, she said. In 1954, accompanied by her husband, Elizabeth became the first reigning monarch to set foot on Australian soil. Television in Australia was still 2 years away, so Australians had to turn out in person to see, for the first time, the Queen's now familiar wave. And turn out they did. An estimated 75% of the population flooded the streets, with more than 1 million people assembling in Sydney alone, the peak of royal adulation in Australia. I am proud indeed to be at the head of a nation that has achieved so much, the Queen told the crowd. During the 58-day visit, the royal couple took 33 flights, 207 car trips and several train journeys to visit every capital, except Darwin, and 70 country towns. Queen Elizabeth met Indigenous Australians, including artist Albert Namatjira and the Timberi family of La Parise, who threw boomerangs for her in Wagga Wagga. She graced the cover of Women's Weekly for 8 weeks in a row. In all, the Queen came to Australia 16 times. Each time she was met by flag-waving, cheering crowds in cities and towns from the nation's coast to its arid centre, which held a special place in her heart. It has a magnetic effect upon those who want more out of life than humdrum security and the tiny rules of a comfortable suburbia, she said of Central Australia in 1963 on her second visit. She was greeted with admiration in all corners of the country and inspired everyone from children to Robert Menzies, who famously quoted 17th century poet Thomas Ford and proclaimed, "I did but see her passing by, and yet I love her till I die." In 1960, 11 years after Charles was born, and 9 years after Anne, another son arrived in the form of Prince Andrew. 4 years later, Edward was born. The Queen's schedule remained largely unchanged over several decades. Every day brought more paperwork, a steady stream of correspondence, cabinet minutes, and state papers that arrived in the famous red boxes. In the afternoons, the Queen turned her attention to official engagements, clocking up hundreds of appearances each year. Tuesday evenings were reserved for the Prime Minister. The Queen was said to have capped each day with a gin with a dash of Duvenet. But such times of rest were fleeting. The constant workload meant Elizabeth had more in common with working mothers than perhaps any monarch before her. Most people have a job and then they can go home, she told the BBC in 1992. And in its existence, the job and the life go on together because you can't really divide it up. At a time when women were meant to be seen, not heard, Elizabeth was the head of a kingdom and her own family. There were difficult times. Philip initially struggled with life in the Queen's shadow, always walking a few steps behind, and felt his considerable energy was wasted. Tensions also arose over Margaret's wish to marry her father's equerry, the 4-sea Captain Peter Townsend. The pair's romance captured the public's imagination, but at the time it was still unthinkable that a royal could marry a divorcee. For years, the Queen, who by law had to approve the marriage, was caught between the wishes of her sister and those of the government and church. Margaret was eventually told she would have to renounce her claim to the throne to marry Captain Townsend, and she, mindful of the church's teaching, gave up the man she loved. When she came to the throne, Queen Elizabeth II oversaw a British Empire that still governed vast swaths of land in Africa, Asia, and elsewhere around the globe. During her reign, she witnessed its dismantling, a process that had begun with independence for India in 1947 and ended with the 1997 transfer of Hong Kong to China. From the ashes of the empire rose the Commonwealth of Nations, which grew from a handful of nations to 53 members, Australia among them. The Commonwealth was regarded by Elizabeth as one of her greatest achievements and one of the true unifying bonds in this torn world. The Commonwealth is not an organization with a mission. It is rather an opportunity for its people to work together to achieve practical solutions to problems, she said in 2009. It's not clear how the Queen's beloved Commonwealth will fare without her at the helm. Even before she died, several member countries began the process of removing her as the head of state. At times, the Queen may have contemplated her own demise. In 1981, 6 planes were fired at her at close range during the Trooping the Colour ceremony in London's Mall. The shots spooked the horse but not the rider. In a bizarre incident to the next year, the Queen awoke at Buckingham Palace to find an intruder sitting at the foot of her bed. She reportedly chatted with him for 10 minutes, then, on a pretext of getting him some cigarettes, went to the door and summoned help. During her reign, Elizabeth travelled to 109 countries, meeting countless leaders, public figures, and famous faces. There is nowhere on this planet that I can think of that she hasn't been in the last 90 years, her grandson Prince Harry said in 2015. The Queen's calm exterior was never ruffled, though it was at times tested, including by her own family's woes. By 1992, the royal family was in turmoil. Prince Charles' rocking marriage to Princess Diana fell apart, and the pair separated that year after a series of damaging exposures of extramarital affairs. Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson announced their split after the publication of photographs showing a topless Duchess having her toes sucked by her American lover. Princess Anne also divorced from Captain Mark Phillips, though their separation was discreet and without scandal. After a fire destroyed part of Windsor Castle in November, causing £50 million worth of damage, Queen Elizabeth lamented, 1992 is not a year I shall look back on with undiluted pleasure. In the words of one of my more sympathetic correspondents, it has turned out to be an annus horribilis. But one of the most testing times as a monarch was yet to come. When Diana was killed in a car crash in Paris in 1997, the world was stunned. The Queen, apparently driven by a desire to protect her grandsons and a deeply ingrained commitment to royal protocol, made 2 grave errors. She declined to cut short their trip to Balmoral, and she did not lower the flag over Buckingham Palace to half-mast. For the first time in her long reign, she faced a howl of outrage from her subjects who mourned the incredibly popular People's Princess. Has the House of Windsor a heart? Asked the Daily Mail, while the Express boomed, "Show us your care." The Sun's headline read, "Where is our Queen? Where is her flag?" And a week later, dragged into a new world of public emotion, Elizabeth gave her first live televised address in 38 years. It is not easy to express a sense of loss since the initial shock is often succeeded by a mixture of other feelings: disbelief, incomprehension, anger, and concern for those who remain. "We have all felt those emotions in these last few days," she said. The Queen's popularity took a beating after Diana's death, and more pain lay ahead. "Grief is the price we pay for love," the Queen said in 2001, after the September 11 terrorist attacks in New York stunned the globe. The next year, she suffered 2 shuddering losses in quick succession. Her sister, Princess Margaret, known for being more of a fun-loving free spirit than other royals, died at age 71 following a stroke. The Queen had lost one of her most intimate companions. Known for exercising rigid control over her emotions, she said, diminished at the funeral, overwhelmed by grief. Just 7 weeks later, the Queen Mother died in her sleep at the age of 101, with Elizabeth at her bedside. We'll see it in part 3.